Hi BookTube, it's Amy, and I'm here with a video that I'm calling A Guide to the Letters of Madame de Sévigné. If you've been following my channel over the course of the past approximately 2 years, you'll know that I had purchased piecemeal, volume by volume, the complete 7-volume Carnavalet edition from 1927 in English of the Letters of Madame de Sévigné. And I am pleased to tell you that this past Friday I finished reading the last few letters of that 7th volume. And rather than doing what I want to do, which is to go back and start over with volume 1 immediately, I thought I would make the video that I promised to make months and months and months ago when I first started to read the letters, and tell you a few thoughts about the letters, and also make this video as kind of a primer in case you're thinking of also diving into the letters of Madame de Sévigné. So what exactly are the letters? 7 volumes can be a little bit intimidating, but basically what they are the letters of Marie de Rabutin-Chantal, Marquise de Sévigné. The letters that she wrote over the course of her adult life. Madame de Sévigné for short. She was born in 1626. Her name at that time was Marie de Chantal. The Marquise de Sévigné is her married name. But she was left an orphan at an early age. Her father died, and then her mother died, and by the age of 7, she was left to be raised by an uncle. But she was also an heiress at an early age. And by 1644, at the age of 18, she married Henry de Sévigné, becoming herself the Marquess of Sévigné. But by the age of 25, she was alone again as a widow, with at least 2 children, her daughter, Madame de Grignan, and her son, Monsieur de Sévigné. So she became a widow. Her husband reportedly died in a sword duel because he was a bit of a cheater and a philanderer, and just all around not very responsible. And so he gets himself into a sword duel and dies. And Madame de Sévigné, being left a widow at the age of 25 with a large fortune and heirs for that fortune, does not marry again and lives out the rest of her life until 1696, living this kind of literary life in a way. She never wrote any other books, but she was an avid letter writer, writing what's estimated to be close to 2,000 known letters over the course of her life. And it wasn't until 1647 that we see the letters of her adult life published. There might be some out there from her earlier life, but we don't see them in the Richard Eldington edition in English, and I won't hold up this one that's got glassine. We don't see them in the Carnavalet edition in English. The letters, of course, were originally published in French, which was the language that she was writing in. In the Carnavalet edition from 1927 that I read, the first letter begins in 1647, when she was just 21 years old and not married for that long, dealing with that, reckless, philandering husband. And the final letter concludes in 1696, actually after her death, because both these 2 volumes I just showed, the Carnavalet edition and the Richard Eldington edition, both include not only her letters, but also the correspondence coming to her in response to what she was writing. And at least this Carnavalet edition, I'm not sure about the Eldington edition yet. The Carnavalet edition includes a number of letters that actually date after her death, because there are friends and people who cared about her writing about her legacy after she has passed on from this earth. And it's theorized that she probably died of some kind of influenza, because it seems to have been very quick. Although she had, a number of illnesses over the course of her life, there really weren't any significant warning signs, at least in the letters themselves, that it would indicate that she is about to die. It happens kind of suddenly to us as the reader. One moment, she's writing, and although we do kind of see the letters taper off a bit in terms of how much she's writing and how many letters she's sending, at least of the published ones, it does come as a bit of surprise when suddenly, as the reader, we turn the page and discover that she has passed. But as I said, the letters begin in 1647 when she is 21 years old, and they end in 1696. She wrote in French, and she lived her entire life in France, with the exception of a few trips that she took abroad, including a short stay in Rome later in her life. And the letters themselves, they do come sort of sanctioned by her family. This isn't something that someone pulled out of the archives or, pulled out of some library somewhere. It was actually Madame de Sévigné's granddaughter who decided to officially publish some of her grandmother's correspondence. About 614 letters apparently were published between the years 1734 and 1737, and that would be in French, and a further 772 letters were reportedly published sometime in 1754. However, we're told that the letters that dealt too closely with private family members or that were considered uninteresting, and I'd like to know what uninteresting means, we're told that those letters were excluded or perhaps edited entirely. But it wasn't until 1745 that we see the first English edition published. And unless you have some significant money to spend, do not go looking for that first English edition. I would say today the most accessible editions in English are this 1927 Carnavalet edition, which is 7 volumes. There's a little bit of some uncertainty, at least in my mind, about the availability of this Carnavalet edition. So as you can see here, this is the red cloth, and this volume, no dust jacket. This is what it's going to look like if it has the dust jacket. This dust jacket is in glassine, so a little bit hard to look at. But I will show you the title page and frontispiece of this Carnavalet edition. Now there is this burgundy red cloth. There is a blue cloth out there. There is a brown Morocco leather, and I believe there is also a red Morocco leather. And there could be others out there. Maybe there's a tan Morocco leather. But there's this marketing tactic that was used in the early 20th century to create the illusion of scarcity. And so it says here, the Carnavalet edition of the Letters of Madame de Sévigné is in 7 volumes and is limited to 1,550 numbered sets, this being 397. I don't know whether this is 397 as well. It's probably not, because as I said, to put together an affordable set, I bought mine piecemeal. And it's not entirely clear to me whether there are 1,550 red cloth sets, 1,550 blue cloth sets, 1,550 or perhaps 500, leather-bound sets in each color, or whether that 1,550 comprises all the sets together. I would suggest that there are probably more than 1,550 sets out there, and that the 1,550 numbered sets mentioned here are just the red cloth editions alone. So you will be able to find orphan volumes or the full set fairly easily. But you do have to be aware of the cost of collecting all 7 volumes. So of course I am Canadian, so these prices are going to be in Canadian dollars. but you will be able to find or put together a decent set for somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 to 1100 Canadian dollars. I managed to put my set together for about $400, which isn't bad, considering it is 7 books that are almost 100 years old at this point. But how much you spend will depend on the condition of the books, whether they have dust jackets or not, where you're buying from them, where you're buying them from, how much the shipping is going to cost, and possibly the color and the material of the binding. This red maroon is going to be the easiest color to find. The blue is out there, but they seem to be less common, and the leather bound sets are of course going to be more expensive. If you're looking at the 7-volume leather bound sets, you're probably looking, unless you find a really great deal, somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,500 to 2,000 Canadian dollars, which is out of my price range. I will not be having a leather bound set of the Carnavalet edition anytime soon. If you're looking for a cheaper option, the Richard Eldington edition, which is unfortunately not all 1,079 letters that are included in the Carnavalet edition, but the Richard Eldington edition includes, I think, 121 of the letters, so it's a selection, and it is in 2 volumes. I've got volume 1 right here. Volume 2 is on the shelf over there. Unfortunately, about a third of volume 2 is not letters, but is rather index material. But the Richard Eldington edition, and this is from 1937, is also a good choice if you want to read some of the letters and are looking for a nice vintage edition. Alternatively, I do believe there is a Penguin edition out there, which once again will give you only a small portion, a small selection of the letters. I don't believe the Penguin edition is currently in print, but you should be able to find a nice secondhand edition somewhere online, or perhaps in a bookstore out in the wild, for just a few dollars. But as I said, both the Eldington edition and the Penguin edition is only going to include a small selection of the correspondence. If you're looking for as wide a collection of the correspondence as possible, I think the Carnavalet edition is a good way to go. And of course, given the age of this, it's quite possible that you'll be able to find some sort of free ebook online somewhere. I haven't looked myself because I am sort of a physical book person all the way, but it's possible there are other options out there. And then of course, if you read French, you'll be able to read the letters in the original, and I suspect you would be able to find a very affordable edition in the French. I unfortunately do not read French very well, or very much at all, and so I was confined to the English edition for my first reading. So the letters themselves are considered classic, not only because of Madame de Sévigné's writing style, which is at times, humorous and witty, but they're also well known for that window that they provide into life in 17th century France. It's sort of a similar deal as to why we read something like the Diary of Samuel Pepys. It's interesting at times, mundane, everyday life, sometimes witty, sometimes humorous, but we're getting a historical window into a certain period of time. And for me at least, it's kind of an added bonus that the letters, especially those between Madame de Sévigné and her daughter, provide this very intimate picture of that mother-daughter relationship, which is something that I really enjoyed reading. So what exactly are the letters? Who is she writing to? Many of the letters are to her daughter, Madame de Grignan, and to her daughter's husband, and later on to her daughter's children, to her grandchildren. She also writes to her cousin, the Count de Bussy. She writes to Armand de Bourbon at one point, the Prince de Conti, so some very well-known historical figures. And she also writes to just a series of friends and acquaintances throughout, the Abbé de Coulanges, Madame de Chatillon, Madame and Monsieur Coulanges, Madame de Lafayette, and a series of others. In terms of the historical time period, she was, of course, living and writing in France during the reigns of Louis XIII and Louis XIV primarily. And she was also living through the many, many wars that France was involved with during that time period. None of them really on French soil, so she wasn't, physically as a person going through these wars, but it was always on the periphery of her letters and her perspective on life. Her son went to Candia during the Cretan War. Her grandson fought in the siege of Philipsburg in 1688, between a war between France and, I guess, an alliance between the Dutch Republic and England. But to be honest, I'm not really up on my French history. But as I said, France's wars, military conflicts, political life, movements of the Prince of Orange, they're all kind of in the background of these letters. But I would say don't come to them expecting dramatic stories. Don't come to them expecting, grand accounts of romances or scholarly historic detail. At the end of the day, these are informal letters written from one everyday person, as everyday of a person as a countess can be, one everyday person to her friends and family. However, she was aware that these letters would be read, at least later on. There is a sense in the letters that she knows that many of these letters are not just being read by the recipient. They're being read, in the house in which the recipient is staying, within that social circle. And so they're written with some degree of literary flair, not only to amuse, but to convey the news, quite often the gossip of the day. And my advice would be to read these letters slowly. As I said, I spent approximately 2 years working my way through them, depending on the edition you decide to purchase. It'll take you less time, it'll take you more time. Certainly if you're reading the Carnavalet edition, I would recommend a slow approach. Perhaps if you're reading the Eldington or the Penguin edition, you'll go a little bit faster just because there is less of it. But I just think it was absolutely delightful to spend all this time going volume by volume, taking them on vacation with me, having a real experience reading them. And now what do I do now that I'm done? As I said, I'm tempted to turn right back to volume 1 and begin all over again. I now have this Richard Eldington edition in the 2 volumes. And I think what I'm going to do is, yes, I am going to begin reading them again. But I'm going to take the Richard Eldington edition. I'm going to take the Carnavalet edition. And as I read through the Eldington, I'm going to refer to the letters in the Carnavalet and see if there are any differences in translation, any differences in editing, and I will get to experience these all over again. And there's one more thing I guess I wanted to know. I think I've talked about this before, sort of the hook as to why I love these so much. Part of it is that wit, that literary flair, but part of it is that tenderness and concern in some of the letters. There were times when, and this doesn't happen often with correspondence, but there were times reading the correspondence when I was close to being in tears just because of that tenderness and that concern and that relationship between mother and daughter, especially when Madame de Sévigné's daughter was pregnant, which was a very dangerous condition for her in this period of history, and when her daughter was ill, as she seemed to have been often, or when her grandchildren were ill. It's this very, very real emotion that resonates through the centuries to us as the reader today. And that alone, I think, is enough reason to read them and reread them over again. So those are my thoughts after my first reading of the letters of Madame de Sévigné in an English translation. And I would love to be able to tell you the translator here, but the Carnavalet editions do not list a translator. We have a preface by A. Edward Newton, but I do not think A. Edward Newton was the translator here. And we have an editor's note, but nowhere in this set do I find the editor listed, and nowhere in my online searches have I found the editor. Certainly in the Richard Eldington edition, I believe Eldington himself is the translator, and the Penguin edition also has a separate translator, but I don't have that copy in my hands. You will have to search into that for yourself. But if anyone has knowledge about who the translator of this Carnavalet edition would be, I would love to know. Let me know in the comments below. But I will close this video for now, and I hope to see your thoughts on the letters of Madame de Sévigné in the comments below.